Hello, in this video I want to examine a little bit deeper the impact of Governor Macquarie on the design of Sydney and larger New South Wales, and his impact on Australia, and to have a closer look at the 5 townships which he ordered to be founded in December 1810. He wrote a letter to his governor, James Meehan, for the Castlereagh, Richmond, Windsor, Pitt Town and Wilberforce. The letter still survives, and all the townships were built around the same proportions with the exception of Windsor, and that in itself is very important, and we can examine what that means. But the standard dimensions of these towns, with the exception of Windsor, was 8 chains by 12 chains, one chain being 66 feet, and the road width was 66 feet. Also, the minimum height of walls was to be 9 feet or 108 inches. It may seem like an irrelevant point, but it's full of knowledge, and you need to understand the measurement systems and the numbers, and from there we can begin to decode the esoteric or occult meaning in these designs. This is the town of Richmond. It's in northwest of Sydney, and you might say it's the second most important of those 5 townships, and as with pretty much all small towns around Australia, a war memorial, most often an obelisk war memorial, is one of the key pieces in the town plan and in the parks. But of course, not part of the original plan. World War I hadn't begun. But St Andrews in Richmond, the spire is the sister of St James in Sydney, commissioned by Governor Macquarie and designed by Francis Greenway. Both of these being well-known Freemasons, and especially Governor Macquarie being described as a conscientious Freemason. So he wasn't just a member of a club, he was a practitioner of what's called the craft. And to really understand what I'm going to go into, we need to have a look at a Masonic tracing board. And one of the key features throughout sun and moon, also earth and stars, the celestial and terrestrial sphere, but the Doric, Ionic and Corinthian columns. More than just a type of architecture, they're actually an ancient measure system, and if we look at the Parthenon, we can see how it's designed in such a way that these various measure systems are all harmonized into whole numbers, and not only that, but into beautiful numbers as well. The town plan of Richmond, 8 chains by 12 chains, so we have this 528 number, but what I'll focus on now is 792. So at 792 hands is the perimeter, 792 repeated. The diameter of the earth above 99.99% is 7,920 miles. The description of New Jerusalem in the Bible, 12,000 furlong, that's again a unit of 792. And so going back to the Parthenon, if we apply especially the Ionic, and what do we get with 792? Descriptions of the diameter of the sun and the moon. So we have the earth, we have the temple of man, New Jerusalem, and the sun and the moon, which will only become apparent if you understand the Ionic system. Doric I've mentioned before, such as used in the Eiffel Tower and several other locations across Washington and these important cities. 792, it's a harmony point where sun, earth, moon and the temple of man harmonize. The block in itself, 8 by 12 chains. It also encodes Euclid's 47th for Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared plus c squared, something that all school children learn, but something which is hugely important in esoteric occult knowledge. The third step is often is to meditate on Euclid's 47th. So the Vesica Pisces also defines these blocks. We have again 32 rods, 528, 792 repeated over and over. Next we go to the town of Windsor, a short distance from Richmond. Only by comparing other sites such as Versailles, Washington, and other places. Some details I would have ignored before, but in comparison, these other well-known esoteric designs, this street arrangement might be considered an accident, but it's not, because I've found the same in Versailles and many other places. But sticking to the topic, the town of Windsor, here we see an older map commissioned. Lachlan Macquarie ordered it, and James Meehan was the surveyor. Once again, these small towns have the war memorial because of the tragic loss suffered in World War I, and how these small towns were deeply affected, but also the use of obelisks. In these towns especially, the Macquarie towns, the obelisks are omnipresent, and not just one. Usually there'll be several of them in some form, but typically the war memorial obelisk. Well, the anchor, it's a famous symbol for, and you'll find it on, again, Freemasonic tracing boards. It's one of those, always there to be, and it might be overlooked, but and thought of in some sort of it's not important. It's not important, but it's actually very meaningful, and the fact that there's a bust of Governor Macquarie on this is a double confirmation that this inland town, which shouldn't have a marine anchor, for one thing, it's not on the coast, it's inland. And the park, now just across the road, we're going to go have a look at the church across, but first, these 5 townships are often called the Macquarie towns, and they don't, and it's not just about honouring Governor Macquarie, it's also about honouring his wife Elizabeth, who was a very intelligent, a very influential, a very important lady. She herself was brought the architectural books which were to be used by her husband, by the architect Greenway, as well as the surveyor Meehan. But on this monument, there's many small little details, and it's in itself, you could spend quite some time examining and explaining them, and then comparing them to the grand cities of the world, the great capitals, Washington, Astana, Brasilia, and of course here in Australia, Canberra. I mentioned in some earlier videos the not just the design impact Macquarie's had on Australia, but also the social impact they had on Australia, and how they very much made it the place that it is today, and that's in the good things most people would consider. But so this in Windsor, but we can see as we move around, there's a map there, but yes, Pitt Town, Castlereagh, Wilberforce, Richmond and Windsor are the 5 towns, and a picture of Elizabeth and some of the flowers that which have been named after her. The statue itself has got quite a little in there. Some of these symbols, such as this scroll, are actually it's a Hermetic symbol, and there are other key little points. He was from the 73rd Regiment of the Foot. 70, that might just be a coincidence of once you can say, but 73 and 37, which I'll examine later, are again levels that are hidden underneath, and I'll get to them in the future and how they relate to modern architecture across the world. So the 73rd, I would very strongly argue that it was chosen or given to him because of the special importance of that number. 73 is the 21st prime number, 37 is the 12th. Palindromes, 37, 73, 12 and 21. Well, the street there was named Greenway. The architect Francis Greenway was designed this church and many others, and just like Macquarie, he was a Freemason. The obelisks amongst these, the gravestones, were often a symbol for people who were members of these groups. Instead of having a Christian cross, they would have an obelisk for their symbol. The Kiama obelisk, I showed the plaque, and non-conformists would have geometric symbols rather than angels and crosses, for example. And the churchyard itself, I've got many other pictures, but the gravestones, especially those with these esoteric symbolism, will also have multiple layers, such as a hexagon or a checkerboard tiling on the stone. Amongst the symbolism and the measurements, there'll also be another important thing to understand and to confirm and to see how deep this runs, is also to count, for instance, in the archways, especially you'll find wall 33 and 32. I can't recall, but anyway, we're here inside the church. Again, small church, but it's still quite nice. I visited and posted, for instance, the church in Camden, and these were important social centres. And one of the things that got Macquarie into such trouble was the fact that instead of making a penal colony, he was designing towns, he was building churches, and building infrastructure for a nation rather than a prison colony. The church itself, not just in the original plans, but also in the symbols that come later, again, will run very rich with, especially Freemasonic, Oddfellows, Rosicrucian types of symbolism, such as the anchor and these reeves and other things. Again, there's quite a lot of detail, and to explain it, would take quite some time on their own, but it's an inland town, it's on a river. The marine anchor really has no place in there. You might think it's got a navy symbol, but you'll find that these are, even when non-naval people will have these symbols, because it's esoteric, it's an occult thing. An occult, I don't mean in satanic, I mean as in hidden knowledge. The checkerboard floor, even the star patterns, again, if you start counting these things out, you're going to find that the measurements, but also, they're always going to come back to the same set of numbers, especially the Pythagorean scale, or the, in inverted commas, the esoteric scale based on 33. Richmond differs from the other Macquarie towns in that instead of being the blocks of 8 by 12 chain, it's 5 by 12 chain. The other blocks used the 3, 4, 5 triangle as the Pythagorean theorem as the basis, but Windsor is different, and it's still Pythagorean though. It's the 5, 12, 13 triangle. That's the second of the Pythagorean triplets, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I believe that the reason for this is because it makes Windsor the capital town of this small, of the 5 towns. Windsor is selected to be the capital, the prime city, the main one. So just like the other townships, it's built on Pythagorean theorem, and just like the other townships, it's built around these numbers 792 and 528, and again 33, so 330 feet, which in previous episodes I've shown how that's in other structures across the world, again in those great capital cities, Washington, Astana, Brasilia and Canberra. So the plan of the city contains huge amounts of information, and one of the main points is that it's a harmony between various scales of measure, but also various numbers which connect sun, earth, moon and the temple of man, has especially compared to the New Jerusalem as described in the Bible. So these townships are much more than just some simple grid drawn out to be easy and to have no meaning. We can see the comparison. Richmond, Wilberforce, Pitt Town and Castlereagh being built on 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triplet, as where Windsor is built on the 5, 12, 13, marking it as separate, marking it as special amongst those 5 townships. Governor Macquarie and all these people involved in this type of esoteric groups are about systems of knowledge and about harmonies. Now, before the first European lodges were formalised, Athanasius Kircher, a famous, very prolific Jesuit, in his artwork we can see he's establishing many of the many of the key elements of modern Masonic tracing boards can actually be found. For instance, on the we see the 3-4-5 triangle, but also 1-2-3-4, indicating the Pythagorean Tetractys, and on the left-hand side, the pentagon and the hexagon, pentagram and hexagram, 5s and 6s, very important for geometry. But much more than just the Pythagorean triplets, we have the Vesica Pisces, a fundamental unit of sacred geometry from which all else grows. 528, 32, 792, sun and moon numbers. But in Windsor especially, the 5 chains, 330 feet. Again, 33, 440. Well, the Great Pyramid is 440 cubits, even the 440 tuning scale, but that's people don't like that. But there's some really cool 4-dimensional things in there in arithmetic. Now, what else is he using? What else is he telling us? We can find some of that in Revelations and the description of New Jerusalem. Now, New Jerusalem is new in comparison to older knowledge such as the Sumerians, but we'll begin with New Jerusalem, with the 12,000 furlongs by 12,000 furlongs by 12,000 furlongs. A furlong is 10 chain, so 660 feet. The area and the square areas, the volume and the area also brings us to these Pythagorean numbers I've mentioned before, 432, 864, 1728, 144. But also, what are they? What else is hidden underneath? 528 and 792. New Jerusalem, as it's described, is not what it is described. It's an allegory. It's a conversion stone. Just like the Salamis stone from ancient Greece is about various units of measure. For instance, 528, 792, it's also a perfect conversion point for meters, perfect 33 in Ionic, 99 in Ionic, 99 in Doric, common, Doric and Ionic. The harmony point provided by the Salamis stone, where all these units converge on beautiful numbers, as seen in the Parthenon in Athens. The tracing boards have the same Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. Now, what's a Corinthian foot? Well, I believe it's the Cremona scale, but that's another topic. Now, again, with Kircher, music, so Ionic and Doric are measurements, as in a ruler measurement, but we also measure music. We measure time and as well. And if we see this particular piece from Kircher, it might be a bit difficult to read here, but Dorian and Phrygian and Lydian and all these other scales, well, Doric and Ionic. Dorian is Doric, for instance, and Ionic is well, it's there as well. But back at least 1500 years before, actually, well, much longer than that, the Ark of Utnapishtim, the flood as described in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, Babylonian, 108. That will be in various forms in the measurements, but also in the description of its construction. As 792 is Sun, Earth and Moon, these numbers are also Sun, Earth and Moon. I've mentioned them before, but it's if you haven't seen the earlier episodes, the long foot. So again, a harmony between various scales of measurement, coinciding on Sun, Earth and Moon, coinciding on these lovely numbers in arithmetic and their important numbers in geometry. The canonical cubit will also connect here. Underneath the Pythagorean, we have these other hidden sets of measures which take us to the hidden numbers, 33, 66, 99, etc. The Vesica Pisces, again, it's one of the definitions of it I mentioned in an earlier episode in regards to the synodic month, but also 108. The Ark of Utnapishtim, the Ark of Utnapishtim is New Jerusalem. That's what they're telling us. It's the same dimensions, it's the same sets of numbers. It's just a shifted scale, like remove 3 zeros from the end, and as described in the old Sumerian Babylonian cube at 144. Once more on the long foot scale, an ancient unit of measure. Some might dismiss it, but here we see why it's so important, why it was highlighted by those early archaeologists who were studying Stonehenge and other stone circles and other ancient structures around the world. So not just ancient Greece, which was 2,000 years at least after Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. 144, so it describes New Jerusalem, it describes the Ark of Utnapishtim, it describes the sun, it describes the moon, and also it describes the Vesica, which again describes so much else in astronomy and in arithmetic and in beautiful systems of knowledge and its harmony. So this one number will bring you to so much else, and this one number will take you to the next and to the next, and it's all across the world and it's all across cultures. The Bible is a noob compared to the Sumerians and Babylonians as well as the Indus. 432. We've touched on that, and well, in the Yugas, again, 432, the Kali Yuga, but also in the Great Flood myth of the Hindus, there's a cycle of which is based around 432,000 years. Here we see, in regards to Manu, the connections between Manu and the Ark of Utnapishtim are amazing, and also to the Great Flood of Noah. They're the same story. It's the same numbers. It's the same legend. It's connected so intricately, and basically Christianity, as we know it, was founded by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who was into the Mithras cults and was the head of a sun cult. That's why we celebrate Sunday, not the Sabbath, Saturday. It's Sunday. Christianity is a sun cult. It's the legends from the Indus and the Sumerians directly connected to New Jerusalem and to the flood of Noah. 432 describes the sun, the Yugas. It's also hidden underneath the Vesica, the geometry, the G in the tracing boards. Why Kershaw and Dürer and all these other people were fascinated with geometry and number and proportions, because it links. It's a system of linking and bringing everything together. 864 again in New Jerusalem, but it's much earlier. It was described in the Ark of the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Ark of Utnapishtim, who is an ancestor of Gilgamesh, and he was the Noah of the ancient world. In the Yugas, once again, 864, 864,000 to be more precise, but 86,400 chains. There are 86,400 seconds per day. That's one of the links. Weights and measures, measuring time, measuring distance, measuring angles and direction. 86,400, 864,000 years in the Yuga. 864,000 miles describes the equatorial diameter of the sun in the mile that we are familiar with, which is 5,280 feet per mile, 528. 864 also appears in the Vesica. Do you see like how it's connected, it's joined? These are they all come from a common source. And the ancients, as in the very ancient, and the Romans and the Greeks and the Byzantine, all of these people kept on encoding this in their weights and measures, in their legends, in their architecture, in their symbols. The Yugas, once again, 1728 describes the Satya Yuga. To call this a coincidence is to describe yourself as fundamentally resistant to any sort of learning. Less coincidences are accepted as a pattern in the modern world. If it's like saying it's a coincidence the sun rises in the east, and it's just been lucky that for the last billions and billions of days the sun's been rising in the east. It's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. Governor Macquarie has again described as a conscientious Freemason, not just a member of the club to network. He was conscientious in practicing the craft, the knowledge, and about putting it into the land, putting it into the design of communities, just like George Washington. Doric, Ionic and Corinthian on the tracing boards. Sun and the moon, the celestial sphere, the terrestrial sphere, sun, earth, moon and stars. So these Masonic tracing boards come from older streams of knowledge, and they've just been modernized, and it's hidden in plain sight because of the importance, but also because of fundamentalist forces, the kind of people, we'll not call them flat earth, the flat earthers such as the Pope burned Hypatia. They killed Giordano Bruno. They burned the Library of Alexandria. They committed one of, surely amongst the greatest crimes in the history of all civilization, built on religious fundamentalism and dogma, and the idea that we are the center of the universe when we are not. We are part of this grand system, sun, earth and moon. And now, so 792 I described earlier as being a unit which links sun, earth, moon and the temple of man, such as in the description of New Jerusalem. Now we need to look at what's the importance of 528. The Sydney Harbour Bridge is surely one of the most iconic structures in the world, at least the iconic images of Australia. 5,280 inches high, or 440 feet, 52,800 tonnes of steel, no mistake. John Bradfield, the architect, was a Freemason. The Manchester Unity building in Melbourne, Australia, headquarters of the Oddfellows, 132 feet or 528 palm, exactly the same height as the High Court building in Canberra, Australia. 132 as well, that's half of that is 66, half of that is 33. This is one of those esoteric, the hidden, in inverted commas, Masonic numbers. Across America, amongst the most sacred buildings of the American nation includes numbers built around 528. For instance, the Lincoln Memorial, not only being 99, 66 or 33 yards high, it's multiple references to 528. The Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis. Throughout the building, the Tyler's Room is also the dance, the main hall, 528 and 792 and 33 and 66. These are the sacred buildings, the most important buildings in America, just to give people an understanding of what's really happening. But what's the main purpose of 528? It's a harmony point between weights and measures and arithmetic. Rods, 32 rods per mile. 1 mile, 5,280 feet. 33 pounds, 528 ounces. The 32nd triangular number is 528. Earlier harmonies between various measures around sun, earth and moon being based around 792. The same thing happening with the weights and measures that we still are used, especially in America, which hasn't gone metric yet, and hopefully it won't go entirely metric, because the knowledge of this imperial system is quite profound. It's a little bit more difficult to do the math and to do the conversions, but there's knowledge underneath. Metric is great. I love the metric system. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not saying get rid of it, but it is there's nothing really much hidden underneath, and that's what makes this system so beautiful. It's about esoteric. You're initiated into the knowledge. There's levels of knowledge you need to learn. One leads to the other, and you'll go deeper, forever deeper, but always coming back to the same harmonious system, and about the town plans and architecture and so much more. And this is why they refer to the G, or the great architect of the universe. Just as in the eclipse is this wonderful balance of Earth, Sun and Moon, so is the systems of geometry, so are the systems of measure. This is what Governor Macquarie established in Australia. This is what George Washington established in America. This is what's happening in Astana. This is what's happening in Brasilia.